welcome to another Your Pennsylvania Ancestors, where you might just hear in the background some of that cicada party we've been having here in Pennsylvania the last couple weeks. In this episode, we are going to cover county histories. Why would I ever read something that is potentially so boring and so long in doing genealogy? Is it really worth the time? So I'm going to tell you what I found, why I read them, and then you can decide for yourself if you thought I got something out of it, or maybe it will help you. But I used both online things, downloading them to my iPad, or reading them on my computer, and I actually ordered a book from the local historical society in Center County because it involves Scotia, and that Scotia name I knew was a town that didn't exist anymore, and I wanted to find out everything I could about it because that name keeps coming up in my research. Let's get to it, how I do this research, and what I found. Before I even get started reading these histories, I want to make sure I have all my locations for what I'm going to be reading about. I'm not reading the entire county history from front to back. I want to be able to just focus in on what I want. So I go through my records and I look at John Curry's death record, and he died in the 20th century, so I have an official death certificate, and I have a location on there for where he died, which unfortunately is just Pennsylvania, but I do have his burial place. I also looked for John Curry's probate records. He did not have a will before he died, but he did have an orphan's court record, and it's really not him, right? Because John's dead. He didn't produce the orphan court record. It was his wife, Anna, who went to the orphan's court and asked for, I believe it was $250 to be transferred to her. So to me, that sounds like a checking account, a savings account at a bank. It doesn't seem to indicate exactly what it is in the orphan's court record, but she had that asset transferred to her. And there was very little information in the file. It did list their children alive at the time, so that was another verification of that family. Now, the one thing I really love to always get is these marriage records, because I have the people involved going to a courthouse, to a county clerk, and saying who their parents are, where they were born, and how old they are. I love this information coming from the actual person involved rather than getting it second or third hand, and they're swearing that this is in fact true, right? So I do have this marriage record for John Curry. I have from there his birthplace as Scotia or Benor, which was fantastic. So military record, John's a man. He might have served in the military, and he has a draft record for that 1917 draft. So I'm excited to see that. And that draft record listed his birthplace as being Clearfield, the town of Clearfield in Clearfield County. And it also gave his birth date. So I'm very excited about this. If John had been a new arrival to America, there would have been a naturalization record for him, and that would have been great to have, but there is not that document, so I can cross that off. And there is no birth record for John because he was born in 1889 and the official records start in 1893 with a county registration. So nothing for John. If he had lived longer to when Social Security took effect, there could have been a delayed birth certificate for him, but he didn't live that long. And that delayed birth certificate, he would have went and verified through some affidavits where he was born and when he was born, so he could apply for a Social Security number. But I am going to look for a baptism for him from a church, and these county histories are going to help me figure out what church to look for. Out of all the records I collected on John and his siblings, I got all these fantastic locations of places that I want to make sure I read about in the county histories. I got the town of Clearfield, I got Axeman, I got Spring Township in Center County, I got Benor, PA, which I also know as Scotia, I have New Millport back in Clearfield County, and I have State College, PA, also as a birthplace, and we all know that is the home of Penn State. Now, I took a moment and put on my Google My Maps the locations for John's family, because I just wanted to see, like, where are these exactly? Doing this extra step really got me grounded as to where they are. And I realized that the distance, let's say between Clearfield and Curwensville and New Millport, each location there is about 5 to 6 miles. So that isn't very far. It looks further on the map than it does in actuality. So this was good to know. And the same thing in Center County. The locations where the family weren't that far apart. And it would help me figure out transportation and where they worked and where they lived and all those sort of things that really flesh out that understanding of the family and locating more records for them. What I wanted to find as I was going through these county histories is I wanted to know the churches that existed when these families were around. I want to know the name of the church, when it was formed, the denomination, and who all was involved with the church. I also want to know the employers and the industries. Where were people working? And what are the names of those companies? Were they called different names? There might be archival records listing the employees, and that would help me track a family between the census dates or before the census named everyone in a family. I also love to find out the narratives or the stories about the area, and I could get this through these county histories. The county histories also tell me who I call the locally famous. So these are the wealthy people, the major landowners, and the merchants. So all these individuals could have diaries or letters in an archive. And in those diaries or letters, they could be talking about my people that I'm researching. So I would only be able to find that, though, based on the names of these locally famous people, because that's what the collection would be entitled at an archive. The other thing in these county histories is the Union troop formation. So when troops formed to fight in the Civil War, they often go into great detail in the county histories about how these troops were assembled, and that's going to give me some clues for further research. And the last thing, of course, I always get out of a county history is that broad sweep of history of when the county was formed, when the townships and the boroughs were formed within the county. This is going to help orient me as I search through county records at the county courthouse, through wills or deeds, to, again, locate this family and know exactly where they are at specific points in history. So, what did I find as I read through these county histories? And here's some things I think are going to help me do further research on the Currys. Well, the first thing I found is that Clearfield County was formed in 1804, so fairly early in Pennsylvania history in terms of the formal state history, which of course begins after the United States Constitution is signed. And Clearfield formed as a county and only had 104 taxable inhabitants. So we're talking about 104 men at this time that were being taxed in the county. So this is a very, very small group of people. If I trace the Currys back this far, this is certainly a circumstance where I would really bet that these 104 people all knew each other. I also found out in reading the history that there were early churches in the county that met in homes, and those records no longer exist. Now, I'm not going to let this stop me, this story about the records no longer exist, because that is a person's interpretation at the time when they wrote that history. The records could have been somewhere else, out of their purview, out of their view. So let's say for the Methodists, they were doing the circuit riding, where the minister went from place to place to preach the gospel and baptize people and marry them and bury them, all the functions of a church minister. And those records for that traveling minister would not necessarily be kept in those counties. It would have maybe gone back to a regional place, right? Or it could be in the county where that minister died. So I'm not going to give up and just accept this, that the records don't exist. So I'm going to take them at their word that they don't exist in the counties necessarily, and that they might be sparse, but they might be somewhere else. So I'm going to look at the denomination records to see what exists. And I also found out, looking at some of these locations, that the town of Clearfield and the town of Curwensville, they're technically called boroughs, but they were the only major boroughs in the county of Clearfield until 1858. So these were, in my brain, this is the way I think about it, the only hopping places. These were like the urban centers. This is where people got together. This was the busy part of the county. So I can think of the rest of the county as being forests or agriculture or very spread out. But except for Clearfield and Curwensville, and these two places were about 5 to 6 miles apart. I also got a book called The History of Scotia, and this is an oral history, essentially, that someone did in the 1960s of his memories of that town of Scotia, which, as I've mentioned, no longer exists. In it, the author does a recollection of who worked at the Scotia mines, and both the Heberlings and the Currys are in this book. Now, it's just names, right? I don't have a lot of contextual information. But Anna Heberling and John Curry, both being from Scotia, could have grown up together, and their parents worked in the Scotia mines, right? I have a hypothesis here based on this history of Scotia, and I'm going to have to test this hypothesis out. I don't know it's like, in fact, the truth, right? I don't have a lot to back it up. But this could be how these two individuals met, where they met, through their parents. It's like the girl or boy next door story. And reading further into that book might tell me more about where the workers came from who worked at Scotia and what happened to them after the Scotia mines closed. It's time for a shout out to the newest members of Your Pennsylvania Ancestors Inner Circle. Welcome to Bert Rixner, Janet McNaughton, and Christine Goodman. Thank you for joining as a member, and thank you for your wonderful words as you joined. It really encourages me. If you would like to join as an Inner Circle member for the podcast and get special access to research notes, tutorials, and some bloopers of me while doing the podcast, all while supporting the wonderful content I'm producing, please look in the show notes for the link, or you can go to paancestors.com/members. Thank you. So that is another episode of Your Pennsylvania Ancestors. I hope I shared with you something that can help you in your research. I'm really excited now about searching Clearfield and Center counties and planning a research trip. I'm just trying to figure out what's going to be open due to the ongoing COVID restrictions and to make sure that I have everything I want to search while I'm there. Definitely cemeteries is on the list, and I want to get pictures of sort of the major locations this family was in, so I'm still doing the research, though I don't want to go there until I get everything lined up. For members of my inner circle, I will walk you through exactly how I download county histories, how I work with them on my iPad, how I work with them on my computer, how I highlight, take notes, and then have that information available as I go further along in my research. So it's a video tutorial. I'll walk you through everything so you can copy that or adapt it for yourself. And that is just for Inner Circle members. If you want to join the podcast Inner Circle, you can go to paancestors.com/members or look for the link in the show notes. I have a treat for you next week on Your Pennsylvania Ancestors. I have an interview with author Robert Bell. He updated the book of Ulster surnames. Again, another connection to Ireland related to this family. And I think you're really going to enjoy it because it's a wide-ranging interview. We had a great time, and I think it's going to help you discover your Pennsylvania ancestors.